May 18, 1985. A flight from London touches down at Moscow's Sheremetyevo Airport. Among the passengers is a man who has spent more than a decade living a double life. Oleg Gordievsky, a colonel in the KGB and, officially, the head of political intelligence at the Soviet embassy in London. Unofficially, he is also one of MI-6's most valuable assets, known under the codename Sunbeam. But this return to Moscow feels different. Gordievsky had been urgently summoned under the pretext of attending a routine meeting at KGB headquarters. His instincts and experience tell him something is wrong. This may not be a promotion. It might be the beginning of the end. At Sheremetyevo, no one meets him. That in itself is alarming. For someone of his rank, it would be standard procedure to send an official car and escort. But this time, silence. He takes a taxi and heads to his apartment on Leninsky Prospect. When he arrives and tries to unlock the door to his flat on the 8th floor, his fears begin to crystallize. One of the locks, a third deadbolt that was installed during the original construction but never used, is now locked. Gordievsky doesn't even have a key for it. There can be only one explanation. Someone has been inside. His own colleagues. His own agency. The door was broken into and relocked from the inside. It's a silent message. You're being watched. You're being investigated. Maybe even already exposed. It soon becomes clear. There are listening devices under the wallpaper, bugs on the phone line, hidden cameras and light fixtures. His clothes and shoes have been coated in a special radioactive powder, harmless to health but trackable with Geiger counters. The net is tightening. Gordievsky realizes he's walked into a deliberate and dangerous trap. If he hasn't been arrested yet, it's likely because the KGB still lacks hard proof. But the suspicion is strong. His recall to Moscow is no coincidence. It's part of an internal investigation. Now, his fate hangs in the balance. Not just on what he says or does, but on how quickly and cleverly he can react. He is now surrounded by the very institution that taught him how to detect and destroy ideological enemies. And that institution now sees him as the enemy. Ahead lies the most dangerous period of his entire life. Oleg Gordievsky was born in 1938 into a household where loyalty to the Soviet system was more than expected. It was almost religious. His father, Anton, had served in the NKVD and later the KGB, fully devoted to the state's infallibility. His personal motto, often repeated, was, "The NKVD never makes mistakes." Oleg's mother, by contrast, was educated and quietly skeptical. While she couldn't openly oppose her husband, her doubt in the system was unmistakable. Their household reflected a deeper ideological divide between unquestioning loyalty and the seeds of dissent. Even Oleg's grandmother had secretly baptized her eldest grandson, Vasily, defying the father's authority in private. Oleg grew up as a model Soviet youth, an excellent student, athlete, and active Komsomol member. After graduating high school with a silver medal, he was accepted into MGIMO, the prestigious Moscow State Institute of International Relations. MGIMO wasn't just a university, it was a training ground for diplomats, analysts, and often future intelligence officers. Languages were key. Fluency opened the path to foreign service. Oleg's older brother Vasily had already joined the KGB as an illegal agent, a spy operating without official cover, and he recommended Oleg as a promising candidate. After several interviews at Lubyanka, Oleg was assigned a 6-month internship in East Berlin, officially as a translator. In reality, it was the beginning of a career within the very system he would later betray. His first task: meet with a former KGB informant, a woman who had previously worked for Soviet intelligence. The mission seemed simple: re-establish contact and assess her willingness to cooperate. But in truth, she wasn't the one being tested. He was. Every aspect of the encounter, his tone, reactions, and post-mission report, would be scrutinized by superiors in Moscow. The internship ended. Though Oleg had his doubts about the system, he had seen the Berlin Wall being built, knew about the Hungarian uprising, and had heard of Stalinist atrocities. He still chose to join the KGB after returning to Moscow. In 1963, at 25, he officially became a KGB officer. He was assigned a modest office in Department S, responsible for coordinating illegal agents, spies operating abroad under false identities with no diplomatic protection. But the work was a disappointment. There were no foreign missions, no thrilling operations, just bureaucracy, paperwork, and hollow reports. His dream of action remained unfulfilled. There was one major obstacle to being posted abroad. He was single. The KGB rarely sent unmarried men overseas. The logic was simple. A married officer with a wife and children back home was less likely to defect. Family was insurance. That unspoken rule would soon shape his personal life and his path as a spy. Around that time, Elena Okapian appeared in his life, a German language teacher who, like Oleg, dreamed of a life abroad. Their marriage was quick and practical. For him, it was a ticket to international assignments. For her, a way out of the suffocating Soviet everyday life. Not long after the wedding, Gordievsky received his first true foreign posting. He was sent to Copenhagen, officially as a consular officer. In reality, he was a KGB operative tasked with overseeing illegal intelligence operations in Denmark. By the mid-1960s, Gordievsky had finally received the assignment he had long hoped for. Copenhagen, the capital of one of the West's most open and prosperous democracies, struck him as a different planet. Clean air, polite people, stores filled with goods that Soviet citizens could only dream of. But this new world came with clear obligations. Each morning, he performed his official duties, visas, paperwork, diplomatic functions. But in the afternoon, the real work began. Coded messages, agent meetings, money drops, mission oversight. His responsibility, managing illegal agents operating in Denmark and sometimes in neighboring countries. However, the romantic image of espionage quickly gave way to a harsher reality. Gordievsky discovered that many of his colleagues faked reports, invented agents, and pocketed funds that were supposedly used for recruiting informants. Amid this swamp of fraud and bureaucracy, he tried to distinguish himself, not out of patriotism, but out of professional pride. Already fluent in German and Swedish, he began learning Danish. He took his work seriously and with discipline. Over time, his daily life in the West began to change his worldview. He read banned books like Solzhenitsyn, listened to Western music, and observed freedoms on the streets of Copenhagen that were unthinkable in the USSR. Then came 1968, the year everything changed. That summer, Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia to crush the Prague Spring, a bold attempt at democratic reform. Gordievsky was devastated. He deeply sympathized with the reformers. But the shock ran even deeper. His own brother, Vasily, was at that moment working undercover in Prague as a KGB illegal. According to Oleg, Vasily was directly involved in counter-reform operations, including disinformation campaigns and even kidnappings. It was a turning point. Gordievsky began to feel the gulf between Soviet propaganda and reality more vividly than ever. After the Prague Spring, his belief in the system didn't just weaken. It began to collapse quietly, completely. Meanwhile, Danish intelligence had noticed him. They suspected that the quiet, diligent diplomat was no ordinary envoy. They launched an operation to try to recruit him. One agent even approached him in what appeared to be a honeypot-style setup, exploiting what they believed to be a vulnerability: homosexuality. But the attempt failed. Gordievsky was careful, and he wasn't interested. Still, the surveillance was noted. The KGB Residentura in Denmark reported back to Moscow. Enemy services were showing interest in Gordievsky. That was enough to justify a recall. Officially, it was just a rotation. But for Oleg, it was a forced return and a warning. After years in the West, Moscow felt cold and lifeless. Though formally promoted, he was assigned to routine desk work back at Lubyanka. But something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer loyal. Inside, he had become a stranger to the system he served. What came next would determine not only the future of one man, but the fate of one of the Cold War's boldest intelligence coups. In 1971, the KGB suffered one of its most devastating setbacks abroad. After the defection of KGB officer Oleg Lyalin, British authorities expelled over 100 Soviet embassy staff from London, suspecting them of espionage. Among those removed were officers stationed in Copenhagen, creating a sudden vacuum in the Danish residentura, including the position of Chief of Political Intelligence. Initially, Moscow didn't want to send Gordievsky back, but something happened that changed everything. His older brother Vasily, a seasoned illegal operative, died at just 39, the result of alcoholism and physical collapse. While this was a family tragedy, for the KGB bureaucracy, it became a convenient excuse to release Oleg for overseas duty. In February 1972, Gordievsky was sent back to Denmark, this time with a higher rank and broader authority. At this critical moment, Stanislav Kaplan re-entered his life, a former classmate from MGMO, a Czechoslovak intelligence officer who had defected to the West after the Prague Spring. Working through Canadian intelligence, Kaplan reached out to MI-6 and gave them a list of potential Soviet defectors. One name stood out: Oleg Gordievsky. Kaplan knew him well: intelligent, disillusioned with the system, a reader of banned literature like Solzhenitsyn, and most importantly, a man who could keep his mouth shut. MI-6 launched a cautious operation. First came surveillance. Then casual conversations at diplomatic receptions, all subtle, pressure-free, but with a clear purpose. Was he real? Or a KGB trap? The pivotal moment came when Kaplan met Gordievsky in person. Their conversation was innocuous, almost banal. But as it ended, Gordievsky quietly said, "I won't tell anyone we met." It was a silent nod, the first real step toward defection. In later meetings, MI-6 got to the point. "Are you willing to work with us? Who are you, really?" After a brief pause, Gordievsky replied, "I'm the head of political intelligence." With that sentence, he crossed the line. From that moment on, he was no longer just a KGB officer. He was a British agent. With his recruitment, a new and dangerous chapter began. Every month, like clockwork, Gordievsky met MI-6 handlers in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Copenhagen. There were no car chases or explosions, just quick, quiet, meticulous exchanges. But the threat of exposure was ever present. A single mistake could end the operation, or his life. At first, MI-6 tested him. They gave him questions they already knew the answers to. He passed with ease. More than that, he exceeded expectations. Gordievsky had near-photographic memory, a deep understanding of KGB structure, the interpersonal politics of the residentura, agent code names, dead drops, and even the tone of official telegrams. One of his most valuable contributions came in the form of microfilm. Every week, secret communications arrived from Moscow to the Soviet embassy. Gordievsky retrieved them during lunch breaks, handed them off to MI-6, and returned them just 30 minutes later. The British had developed a special machine to quickly and safely duplicate the film. But a scratch, a fingerprint, even a smudge could mean discovery. Every exchange was a gamble. Crucially, MI-6 used the information with strategic caution. Gordievsky exposed entire networks of KGB agents operating in Scandinavia, in Sweden, Norway, Iceland. But British intelligence leaked only what was necessary, avoiding patterns that might reveal the existence of a high-level mole in Denmark. If a spy was caught in another country, it never pointed back to Copenhagen. This delicate dance went on for years. For years, Oleg Gordievsky lived a double life. At home in Copenhagen, he shared an apartment with his wife Yelena, a fellow KGB officer. She had no idea her husband was secretly working for British intelligence. Her very presence was a constant threat. Had she discovered the truth, duty would have compelled her to report him. At the same time, Gordievsky fell in love with another woman, Leyla Aliyeva, the daughter of a KGB general from Azerbaijan, then working as a secretary for the World Health Organization. She quickly sensed that Oleg was more than a diplomat, but even she didn't know he was a British spy. Gordievsky lied to everyone, his wife, his superiors, his colleagues. And yet, in his mind, this was the only honest thing he had ever done. He believed, deeply, that he was fighting a regime built on deception and oppression. In that betrayal, he found personal moral clarity. Then in 1978, everything changed. A quiet order came down from the Soviet Foreign Ministry, Gordievsky was to return to Moscow. Officially, it was a routine diplomatic rotation. Unofficially, the KGB had begun to suspect him. The signs came fast. First, they learned of his romantic relationship with Layla. Then, word spread that he and Yelena were divorcing. While not illegal, divorce among intelligence officers was considered a serious liability. Divorced men were seen as less stable, less loyal, especially those entangled with people linked to the West. The consequences were immediate. Gordievsky was demoted and returned to desk work at Lubyanka. Stacks of reports, empty corridors, and political fog. But he didn't give up. Quietly, he began to prepare for revival or ruin. He had already asked MI-6, back in Denmark, to develop an exfiltration plan in case things ever went south. That plan now had a name: Operation Pimlo. The concept was bold. If the KGB moved in to arrest him, he would travel to a specific bakery on Kutuzovsky Prospect at exactly 7:30 p.m., carrying a shopping bag marked with a large S, the logo of a British supermarket chain. If a British diplomat happened to pass by at the same time holding a Mars bar, the signal was understood. The exfiltration was a go. Gordievsky would then be smuggled across the Finnish border in the trunk of a diplomatic car, immune to search by Soviet border guards. In the meantime, back in Moscow, Gordievsky married Layla, and they had 2 daughters. It brought him hope, but also complexity. Any attempt to flee would now jeopardize not just his freedom, but his family's safety. Preparing for that day, he also enrolled in an advanced English course at the KGB Academy, finishing a 4-year curriculum in just 2. His linguistic fluency was no coincidence. He had a plan. Then came the opportunity of a lifetime. A vacancy opened at the KGB's London Residentura, Deputy Chief of Political Intelligence. He quietly signaled to his superiors that he was ready. Officially, he was not the frontrunner, but by a twist of fate, several top candidates were denied visas by British authorities due to espionage concerns. Gordievsky's application? Approved. MI-6 could hardly believe their luck. 3 years after their last contact, their most valuable agent was back. This time, in the heart of London, with access to one of the highest posts in the Soviet foreign intelligence system. In 1982, Oleg Gordievsky arrived in London as the newly appointed Deputy Chief of Political Intelligence for the KGB. Officially, he was a diplomat, second secretary at the Soviet embassy. Unofficially, he was MI-6's most valuable asset, a man with the potential to turn the Cold War on its head. At the time, the KGB Residentura in London was one of the most important Soviet outposts. Their mission: monitor politicians, journalists, military officials, and carry out influence operations through planted agents. What Gordievsky found, however, was a mess. His predecessor, Arkady Guk, was a paranoid careerist, obsessed with imaginary spies, but out of touch with the realities of modern intelligence work. Gordievsky began rebuilding. Quietly, steadily, he strengthened his position. But his real objective was to re-establish contact with MI-6. Using a secret number left to him years earlier in Denmark, he set the wheels in motion. Their first meeting played out like a scene from a spy novel. During lunch hour, Gordievsky entered a nondescript hotel. In the lobby, 2 familiar faces. Without a word, they exited through the back. Gordievsky followed at a safe distance. In the parking lot, he climbed into their car. Only after the vehicle pulled away did anyone speak. MI-6 could hardly believe it. Not just a reactivated agent, but a KGB officer with top-level access. The information Gordievsky began passing was staggering. Names of active agents, internal KGB structures, recruitment tactics, encryption protocols, communication methods, everything. Among the most explosive revelations was a file on Michael Foot, leader of the UK Labour Party. According to Gordievsky, in the 1960s, Foot had accepted money from the KGB to support socialist publications. He had not passed classified information, but the association was politically radioactive. In 1983, Labour lost the general election. MI-6 used the information cautiously, never revealing their source. Meanwhile, back in Moscow, something darker was brewing. In the early 1980s, the Cold War reached one of its most volatile points. Soviet General Secretary Yuri Andropov, former head of the KGB, was convinced the West was preparing for a nuclear first strike. This wasn't just paranoia, it was institutional fear. Moscow ordered all KGB stations to hunt for proof of an impending Western attack. In London, the task landed on Gordievsky's desk. He watched his colleagues concoct theories from thin air: increased air traffic at bases, naval movements, encrypted messages. The hysteria grew. Gordievsky passed everything to MI-6. British and American leadership realized the Soviets truly feared an attack and might launch one first. Thanks to Gordievsky's warnings, NATO toned down its rhetoric, modified its military exercises, and worked to lower tensions. It worked. Moscow stood down. Some say he helped prevent nuclear war. By now, MI-6 saw the full value of their agent. The higher Gordievsky rose in the KGB, the more he could deliver. MI-6 quietly aided his career, feeding him low-risk intelligence and helping sideline rivals. In 1984, Arkady Guk was officially expelled from the UK for espionage. Gordievsky replaced him, first as head of political intelligence, then in 1985 as resident of the KGB in Great Britain. It was unprecedented. An MI-6 agent was now running the entire Soviet intelligence station in London. No Western spy before or since has had that level of access. Reports, agents, operations, directives straight from Moscow. Some in British intelligence dared to whisper, if he kept rising, Gordievsky could one day lead the KGB. That was the dream. But it wouldn't last. On the other side of the world, in the United States, a struggling CIA analyst named Aldrich Ames was spiraling into financial ruin. He had married a woman with expensive tastes, and his government salary couldn't keep up. Desperate, Ames made a decision that would alter the course of the Cold War. He began selling secrets to the Soviet Union. But Ames didn't just betray CIA assets. He exposed MI-6's most valuable mole. By analyzing information the British had shared with the Americans, Ames used a process of elimination to identify the source. His name, Oleg Gordievsky. When that information reached Moscow, the KGB launched its most aggressive internal manhunt in decades. Gordievsky wasn't arrested immediately. They still lacked hard proof. But the decision was made. He was marked. Soon after, Gordievsky received an urgent telegram from headquarters. Report to Moscow for a high-level briefing. Officially, just a standard rotation. Unofficially, a death sentence in disguise. MI-6 begged him not to go. It's a trap, they warned. But the choice was his. Gordievsky knew. If he refused, the operation would be shut down, his career ruined, and years of dangerous work lost. If he returned, his chances of survival were slim. He chose to go. Many would later call it suicide. When he landed in Moscow, there was no briefing, just silence, tension, and surveillance. Officially, nothing was happening. Unofficially, the KGB was tightening the noose. Leading the operation was General Viktor Budanov, a feared counterintelligence officer even within the KGB. Budanov organized round-the-clock surveillance, a covert raid on Gordievsky's apartment, hidden microphones, bugged phones, and finally, an invitation to a friendly officers' gathering. The evening began like any other. Vodka, small talk, toasts. But after a few drinks, Gordievsky knew something was in the cognac. His mind blurred. When he woke up, he was in an unfamiliar room, under guard. The interrogation began. "We know you're a spy," they told him. "We know who you work for." But they had no hard evidence. Gordievsky fell back on the training he received at Lubyanka. Deny everything. No names, no confessions, no cracks. After several days, they released him to his apartment. But this was no reprieve. It was house arrest in disguise. He was stripped of his post, cut off from classified material, and told he would never return to London. He knew what that meant. The clock was ticking. He had to escape or disappear forever. Gordievsky was officially removed from his post, stripped of access to classified documents, and told bluntly, "You will not return to London." To him, that meant only one thing. The window was closing. Time was running out. He had to escape. The escape plan, codenamed Pimlo, had been crafted years earlier during his time in Denmark. At its core was a daring yet simple premise. Cross the Soviet-Finnish border, hidden in the trunk of a British diplomatic car, a vehicle immune to inspection under international law. But first, the operation had to be triggered. One Tuesday evening at exactly 7:30 p.m., Gordievsky approached a specific bakery on Kutuzovsky Prospect, holding a plastic shopping bag marked with a bold S, the logo of a British supermarket. At the same moment, a British embassy staffer passed by, holding a Mars bar in plain sight. If he saw the bag, the plan would go into motion. Their eyes met. The signal was received. Back home, Gordievsky soaked pages of a Shakespeare book to reveal hidden escape instructions, rendezvous points, times, and contacts. He knew there would be no second chance. The hardest part wasn't logistics, it was personal. Operation Pimlo had been designed for the whole family. But Gordievsky now doubted whether he could trust his wife, Layla, who knew nothing of his double life. When he subtly hinted at fleeing, her reaction left no doubt: she wouldn't come. He made the most painful decision of his life: to escape alone. On July 19, 1985, wearing a tracksuit, he left home under the guise of a morning jog. He evaded KGB surveillance, navigated the metro, and boarded a night train to Leningrad. From there, he traveled by rail and bus to a remote stop at kilometer 836. In the forest, 2 British embassy cars were waiting. One carried a diplomat's child to deflect suspicion. Gordievsky's clothes were removed, his body scrubbed with a chemical gel to mask his scent from dogs. Then he climbed into the trunk. At the Soviet border, guards inspected documents. A dog passed within inches. Every second felt endless. But finally, the gate opened. Gordievsky was free. In Moscow, chaos erupted. The KGB first suspected suicide or abduction. Days later, they realized he had escaped. Rather than admit it publicly, the KGB launched a campaign of denial, erasing his rank, access, and achievements from the record. He knew nothing important, they claimed. In truth, he had dismantled entire KGB networks in Europe and altered the course of the Cold War. His wife and daughters were barred from leaving the USSR for 5 years, leverage the KGB hoped to keep. When they were finally reunited in Britain, the damage was done. Oleg and Layla divorced. Their daughters remained in the UK, while Layla split her time between countries. Gordievsky lived the rest of his life under protection in the United Kingdom, his location kept secret. On March 4, 2025, he passed away at the age of 86 in his Surrey home. Though few ever saw his face again, his story became legend, not as a tale of betrayal, but of conviction. He died not as a traitor, but as MI-6's most significant Cold War triumph, and as the man who risked everything for one irrevocable belief: that freedom was worth it.